Hi all, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the Iran 1400 Project Spotlighting an Author event. Today we will be discussing Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur's Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, Popular Culture Between Two Revolutions. Thanks for joining us today. As many of you here know, the goal of the Iran 1400 Project is to encourage productive conversations about Iran by looking at the evolution of ideas and institutions throughout the country during the last century. We are certain that today's conversation will be a valuable resource in that mission. Before we introduce our guest, on behalf of the advisory board and the team at Iran 1400 Project, Dr. Hendelman-Baavur, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. We are honored to have you with us to share your research and insights on the Iranian experience. Welcome. Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur is the director of the Alliance Center for Iranian Studies at Tel Aviv University, and she teaches at the Department of Middle Eastern and African History. She is the editor of Iran Then and Now, Society, Religion, and Politics, and co-editor with David Menashri of Iran, Anatomy of Revolution. The format for today's event will be around 30 minutes of listening to Dr. Hendelman-Baavur talk about her book, and after that, we'll have around 30 minutes for a Q&A session. During the presentation, y'all can send those questions in either through the Zoom Q&A, or you can email them to media@iran1400.org. And you can also just send them right before we start our Q&A session or during it. And without further ado, we have a quick teaser, and then we can begin the presentation. Dr. Hendelman-Baavur, you can begin when ready. We're having trouble hearing you. Still cannot hear you. You might hit the button where you can select a microphone and see if you can change that. Still not hearing you.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I do apologize.
No
There
worries.
has to be a drama, I believe. So again, let me start by apologizing and also express my deepest gratitude for the kind invitation to participate in this event. I feel especially honored and also humble for this opportunity, especially against the backdrop of the central and most important role of Iranian women in recent protests. My presentation today is based on my latest book, Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, Popular Culture Between Two Revolutions, published in 2019 by Cambridge University Press, as already mentioned and published. The book represents a long personal journey. It evolved from my PhD dissertation, followed by quite a few years of additional investigation, probing, and study. Generally speaking, the book is divided into two main parts. The first explores the history of Iranian women's newspapers and rise of commercial magazines in Iran. The second part of the book focuses on the formation of the modern woman in the 1960s and 1970s Iran before the downfall of the Pahlavi monarchy in the 1979 revolution. From the outset, it is important to note that academic literature on women's magazines in other countries has merited considerable attention in two central waves. The first was following Betty Friedan's 1963 seminal book, The Feminine Mystique, which paved the way to feminist criticism of stereotype depictions of women in the media. The second wave, or revivalism in literature, followed Naomi Wolf's bestseller, The Beauty Myth, How Images of Beauty Are Used Against Women, which was published in 1990. Although the media-based studies on Iran has gained more ground in recent years, and there are books and studies on media, Iranian studies have neglected to produce analysis similar to studies in women's magazines in the US and UK and Southeast Asia. The general impression emerging from the scant studies on history of Iranian journalism in the West was that women's magazines of the late Pahlavi era have little or no historical significance. Although widely read and circulating, at times in greater numbers than daily newspapers, Iranian commercial magazines have often been dismissed throughout existing literature. Three interrelated reasons are widely used to rationalize this neglect. The first derives from popular magazines associations as semi-official publications. The second is the tendency to regard them as girly publications, preoccupied with lowbrow entertainment, exhausted with ads. And third is the inclination to view them as Western-style gossip sheets, immersed with commercial femininity and commodity culture. In other words, they were disregarded on the grounds of being state propaganda, content of low quality, or imperialistic and capitalist scheme. This line of critique, originating from attitudes toward popular media and its audiences that prevailed in the 1960s and most of the 1970s, served a starting point and an important point of reference for the discussion throughout the book. We can understand that the rise of Iranian commercial and popular magazines for women took place at a time of expanding mass media. During the 1960s and 1970s, the cultural diffusion of Westernization, especially American influence, reached apex in Iran. Anti-colonial notions of modernity were consolidated, and Iranian women also gained suffrage. These were years of great changes and many challenges. The two magazines that formed the main corpus of my study were Etela'at Banovan, or Ladies News, which began publication in 1957 and lasted until 1979, more or less. The second is Zane Ruz, the Modern Woman, or Today's Woman, which began publication in 1965 and continues till this very day, making it the longest running weekly for women in Iran, although it is a lot less popular than it used to be in the mid-1960s and throughout the 1970s. By focusing on these publications during the late Pahlavi era, I was able to demonstrate in my study that in their initial editorial philosophies, they did not present themselves as women's magazines, but rather as family guides for a new life. They singled out the modern woman as their main target audience, but they did not define or explain who exactly she was. Trying to answer the seemingly simple question, who was the modern Iranian woman, proved to be a highly complicated task. There is enough evidence in existing literature to sustain the claim that by the early decades of the 20th century, the modern woman or the new woman as a modern figure, was transatlantic phenomenon, a term used by Angela Richardson. On the one hand, scholars of different regions around the world have identified her as an intellectual and literary construct that was often formed or counterbalanced the unforeseen challenges posed by the rapidly changing modern society. On the other hand, scholarly literature identified the modern woman as a marketing tool in advertisements and other prints. In Iran, as calls for women's awakening reverberated through the periodical press, changes in women's appearance and fashion were increasingly identified with Westernization. And as a result, images of a sexual and unveiled woman were used as emblems of emancipation and closely linked to aspirations of national progress and the modernization project throughout the early decades of the 20th century. The modern woman as an idea and practice of creating a kind of being fit for the prosperous future of Iran was also very central during this time. And this image was set in opposition to the traditional veiled woman that came to signify social backwardness. For many advocates of the Islamic modernism in the 1960s, most notably the sociologist Ali Shariati, the modern woman became the trope of all the vices of modern consumer society. She also came to embody the vices of mass culture that were believed to bring forth moral degradation. Her affiliation with the pejorative term, the intoxicated woman, gharbzadegi, a woman struck by Western influence, proliferated, especially among nationalists, social critics, and left-wing intellectuals in Iran during the 1960s and part of the 1970s. Editorials of women's magazines of the late Pahlavi era did not offer a clear definition of the modern woman. In contrast to the reductive definition of their critiques, Iranian women's magazines offered their female readers an unprecedented range of representations of themselves. Many times, these representations were ambiguous and conflicting. For example, contested views of femininity conveyed women the notion that they could bring about changes in their lives, yet society was wedged on its tradition. They were also given the idea that they were being liberated from the shackles of the past, yet nationally responsible to transmit traditions to the next generation. What seems even more confusing is that alongside the modern woman, the magazines addressed their content to the modern girl, who was approached by additional expressions. While studying the magazines in my search for the modern woman of the 1960s and 1970s in Iran, and the gender implications she embodied, the question arose repeatedly in many guises. What made her modern? Was she an actual historical actor or an imported commercial tool or a cultural hybrid? What was her connection with the foreign Western woman? And what made her different from the modern girl? An exploration of these questions led to a major argument advanced by the book that the modern woman and the modern girl embodied different aspects of modernity in relation to the self, the family, and society during the late Pahlavi era. It is also true that Iranian women's magazines took their cues for success from Western predecessors. This becomes apparent by their tendency to mix practical information, news, creative writing, discussions, and entertainment sections in their content. They also modeled after Western advances in engraving and printing, but they had to adapt themselves to the local market and the nature and needs of their audiences in Iran. Being modern in Iran traditionally meant being attuned to the sensibilities and the aesthetics preferences of the upper classes. This tendency witnessed certain changes with demographic shifts, urbanization, increased literacy rates in the 1970s, and vast expansion of the professional modern middle class in Iran. To be a modern woman, as these magazines conceived of it, was also to be very different kind of subject from the wife and mother of before. What was perhaps most emblematic of the period's changing perceptions reverberates in the 1968 headline, and I quote, "You are the first generation of women to use the birth control pill," end of quote. It conveyed female readers the idea they can have more control over their sexuality and readiness for procreation. Together with the potentiality of sexual liberty, women's magazines discovered the niche of female youth subculture and participated in the creation and the construction of the new modern girl. This modern girl was meant to appeal to educated middle-class teenagers. From the late 1950s onwards, youth had become an omnipresent locus of both public hopes and concerns. Iran at the time was depicted as an old land with a youthful population. By the early 1970s, over half of the country's population, that means 55%, was reported to be under 20. This can partly explain why the rhetoric accompanying the reform program of the Shah's reserved for the youth a paramount role in mobilizing the country and as a metaphor of renewal and promise for the future. Within this framework, the book explores quite extensively the modern girl who had not previously been acknowledged as a figure of distinct importance in Iranian historiography. This is probably because her image is overtly combined with that of the modern woman, with whom she shares many similarities. Both the modern woman and the modern girl of the 1960s and 1970s are usually depicted in existing literature as a single archetype: unveiled, urban, literate, and most importantly, westernized. Westernized through an intimate engagement with the international commodity culture of makeup, fashion, physical exercise, and diet control. Although the two cultural figures are often used interchangeably, temporary identity markers like family status, age group, and specific relationship with the nation and modernity set the experience of the new modern girl somewhat apart from the modern woman. The new modern girl was not yet confined by marriage, parenthood, or employment. Her relationship to modernity was not defined by her skill in managing time-saving electric home appliances or proficiency in other practices associated with the cult of domesticity. The modern girl was totally distinct from her mother. Rather than domesticated, she was the embodiment of revolutionary changes in appearance, attitude, and aspiration. Rather than a simple one-dimensional archetype, the articulation of the modern girl elucidates the fluidity of the modern woman as a generic term, a larger critical category reconfigured by changing patterns of gender segregation and integration. It also illuminates on how the metonymic usage of the modern woman was involved to depict the hopes, fears, pleasures, and dangers of the Iranian experience of Western-style modernity in the late era of the monarchy in Iran. Furthermore, it is also suggested in the book that the modern girl was indispensably connected to the growing importance of youth as a specific target audience for advertisers and journalists, as well as for state policy. Youth acquired an increasing visibility, not only within the era's rhetoric, but also fomented the new and the ultra-modern in Iranian popular culture. For many professional, middle-class urban women and late teens in Iran, these commercial magazines were the main cultural purveyors of modern femininity, global culture, social change, and cultural identity. In terms of outlook, instructions, and advice, they embrace every aspect of life in the pre-satellite TV and pre-internet era. To better understand how Iranian women's magazines of the late 1960s and 1970s tried to reconcile their proclaimed commitments to the cause of women's progress, their heterogeneous audience, commercial visibility, and national ideology of the Pahlavi state, it is important to examine the particular media ideals they crafted for themselves. Within the framework of the National Reform Program, women's magazines offered their readers a series of competitions throughout the years. In addition to surveys and polls, award competitions confirmed the existence of a teenage subculture with shared leisure interests and spending habits. Announced on the magazine's covers, competitions were designed to promote sales, consolidate regular audience, and lure readers to become active participants with the magazine's content. Lasting for varying periods of time, competitions were dedicated to diverse topics, including creative writing, speed typing, and cooking. For the presentation today, I chose to concentrate on the longest running competition for women in Iran, known as the Dukhtar Shayaseh contest. The competition was initiated by the magazine Zanaruz. It ran for 13 consecutive years until the 1979 revolution. In the course of its first 18 months, the competition underwent significant transformation, evidence that the organizers had difficulty defining it. Most noticeable were the multiple name changes that this competition went through. It was launched in 1965 as the Spring Girl, Dukhtar Bahar. For the following year, it appeared as the Girl of Iran, Dukhtar Iran, with the English heading Miss Iran contest. For the remainder of the history of the competition from late 1966 until 1979, the title Dukhtar Shayaseh was translated into English as Iran Teen Princess in the 1960s and as Miss Teenage in the 1970s. Examining this contest during its formative years illuminates the organizers' strategies and how they were realized by participants. No less important is how this competition was modeled to fit an array of different agendas, highlighting what exactly qualified as the proper modern Iranian girl in the 1960s and 1970s. What I found most interesting is that Zanaruz invested considerable effort in distinguishing its competition from beauty pageants, stressing that it did not focus on glamour or beauty, but rather on the virtuous Iranian woman. The first announcement of the contest specified entrants had to be single, young women between the ages 15 to 25. They were also required to be Iranian by birth and residency, and from a respectable family. Potential candidates were requested to submit an up-to-date photo, a brief biographical description, and list their height and weight. They were also required to introduce parental consent and a list of 10 acquaintances willing to vouch for them. The 1965 Spring Girl contest attracted 245 nominations. The editor of the magazine's poetic and literary section and the program manager selected the top 20 entrants for the final round. The qualifications of the finalists were reviewed according to 4 main categories: education and intelligence, facial beauty and physical proportions, personality, amiability and poise, and finally, photogenicy. The winner of the competition was to be awarded with various prizes, including a full-page photo on the cover of the magazine, a trip to Europe, and a summer vacation in the northern coast of Iran. In August 1965, 20-year-old Muluk Sima Izzadjou won the first and last Spring Girl competition with over 5,000 votes of the magazine's readers. Upon the winning of the contest, she was asked for her opinion on the modern woman and religion. And she answered, and I quote, "In my view, modernity and religion do not contradict one another. And a stylish woman who maintains graceful and moderate clothing is also able to practice religion and be a good and pious person." End of quote. The following year, the magazine announced it was joining the International Tin Princess contest that debuted in Chicago in 1966. This required certain modifications, including converting the pageant into an exclusively teen competition. As of that year, contestants were required to be at least 14, but no older than 18 and a half. In comparison to the small scale and relatively low budget event of the first year, by the second year, Zana Rose was hailing the contest as the biggest seasonal event in Tehran. The main ceremony moved from the magazine's offices to the ballroom of the newly inaugurated Hilton Hotel in Tehran and performed in the presence of more than 700 guests. What boosted the glitz and glamour of the contest was the crowning of 16-year-old Elahe Azoudi as Miss International Tin Princess in 1968. Her accomplishment consolidated the contest as the pinnacle for urban teenage girls in Iran and confirmed the competition as Zana Rose's best recognized enterprise in the Pahlavi era. Throughout the years, the magazine allocated more space to covering the pageant than any other single topic. The considerable promotion proved efficacious as commercial endowment and endorsement expanded. Cosmetic and hair product companies joined the venture as sponsors. The national carrier, Iran Air, and international airlines like Swiss Air and Pan Am became the pageant's biggest sponsors. Cooperations with larger commercial sponsors drove changes in the pageant's rewards as well. And in 1968, for example, the prize package for the winner of the contest included the first car ever assembled in Iran, the Paykan. The magazine's decision to join other countries in an international competition is the clearest indication that Zana Rose strove to incorporate perennial features that have gained momentum since the first Miss America pageant, initially called the Intercity Beauty Contest, was held in Atlantic City in 1921. Throughout the world, women's magazines adopted the initiative of pioneering local pageants that were primarily designed to showcase beauty. In the Middle East, local competitions for title Miss Turkey and Miss Egypt adopted the format in 1929. The global popularity of this competition, as Beverly Solchick contests, rests on their recognition and the ease with which they can be reproduced and adapted to local meanings and familiar symbols. Notwithstanding the adaptation of a familiar format associated with modern beauty pageants, Zana Rose's organizers continue to publicly claim that their main purpose was not to find or elect a beauty queen. Announcements for Zana Rose emphasized that the contest was seeking a young woman who represented best the Iranian civilization and contemporary generation of Iranian women. The pageant does not have to be the most, the pageant contestants do not have to be the most beautiful girls in our country, but they have to be eloquent, have proper behavior, and possess the mentality and personality that characterize the Iranian woman. Insisting that women, the winning contestants, should be meritorious, not only beautiful, demonstrate substance, not only style. The editor-in-chief reassured readers that the pageant's jury consider intelligence, general knowledge, artistic skills, engagement in sports activity, and proficiency in English or French far more important than outward appearance. Earlier announcements regarding the pageants demonstrate that the organizers wished to encourage female participants and established a respectable feminine brand while minimizing opposition and averting contestants' potential disrepute. To stage a beauty contest in a traditional Muslim society confirmed a break with the past, and it was additional proof that the second Pahlavi monarchy had set itself for many people at the time toward the West. It is probably for these reasons that the initial Spring Girl contest was framed in the context of ancient Iranian history, employing local symbols of a primeval celebration of the Nowruz, the Persian New Year, marking the first day of spring, which also corresponded with the inauguration of the magazine the same year. Spring celebrations are also known to be connected with the ancient rites like the Rose Festival, rooted in the Iranian and the Babylonian religion of Bacteria, and the cult of Anahita, the goddess of water and fecundity. An image of a girl wearing flowers was also the main theme of the Iranian contest's logo throughout the years. A sense of awakening often appeared in the candidates' published statement, supporting the magazine's claim that the contest contributed to women's and girls' self-esteem and confidence. When the editor-in-chief spoke to contestants about the pageant's motivation in 1968, he explained, and I quote, "This program is a continuation of the movement for awakening the Iranian women that commenced with the White Revolution under the wise leadership of the Shah. Today's Iranian girl is the mother of tomorrow. She must enhance her confidence and build her character as befitting today's modern life and world." End of quote. The rhetorical diffusion of the movement for women's awakening and self-improvement and the general framework of the White Revolution enabled organizers of the competition to align the pageant with royal patronage and give it national significance. This way, the winning contestants could symbolize the change in women's status and the reforms deployed by the Shah. Replacing spring in the pageant's title for the noun shayesteh, meaning something or someone who is worthy, deserving, eligible, suitable, decent, proper, and of merit, had the advantage of being not easily translated. Obviously, the new title defined the thing the organizers wanted to designate in their enduring efforts to solidify the respectability of Nowruz's venture as a legitimate public event. The self-definition of Dukhtar Shayesteh differentiated the Iranian pageant by cloaking it with local authenticity. Organizers in Iran were very meticulous in emphasizing, for instance, that the pageants in Tehran and in Chicago did not include a swimsuit competition. Self-production and self-definition were also meant to sustain Nowruz's claim of prioritizing virtues and achievements over looks, or in a broader sense, prioritizing the moral and didactic over the materialistic, while competing as an equal on the international stage. Furthermore, organizers in Iran were well familiar with the feminist criticism of beauty pageants in the West. In 1970, Etela'at Banovan editorial featured the controversy surrounding the proceedings of Miss World pageants. The televised event of Miss World held that year in London was disturbed by demonstrators throwing rotten tomatoes, bags of flour, and other artifacts to the stage. The demonstrators, believed to be associated with women's liberation movement and the militant young wing Britain's Liberal Party, protested against what they branded as a cattle show. The parading of women on stage like puppets for the entertainment of men, their satisfaction and desire, the magazine specified, was similar to an ancient slave market. While reporting these events and criticism, the editorial called upon its readers to share their opinion on this controversial topic and promised to publish all responses in the following issue. Rather than celebrating beauty, Zana Rus promoted the pageant as a celebration of young women's accomplishments, both of the individual participants and the national collective. On several occasions, the magazine heralded the pageant as a modern female initiation ceremony aimed at enhancing the values of Iranian teenage girls and their achievements. By the same token, the glitzy, glamorous ceremonial award event was associated with a camp-like experience. In Iran, the ceremony brought together girls from all over the country and promoted sisterly bonds. On the international level, it was claimed, the ceremony was a unique venue for promoting both a world's youth and better understanding between nations. It was also an opportunity to exhibit Iran's achievements, especially the liberation movement of Iranian women. Throughout the years, the contest encountered its fair share of criticism. Most intriguing were reactions by readers who questioned the policies of the pageant and the magazine's ethics. The organizers were compelled frequently to extinguish flaming accusations leveled against the journalistic integrity of the magazines for selecting contestants based on their family connections and economic circumstances. Although the organizers were particularly keen to attract contestants from diverse provinces outside the capital, Tehran, as they were interested in presenting a mosaic of young modern girls from different locales, many of the applicants from remote provinces were unable to travel to the capital for the competitions and were therefore disqualified. Eventually, entrants from Tehran dominated the pageant throughout the years of its existence. Socioeconomic tension and perceived class divisions were not excluded from the capital as well, between the North and the South. In 1971, a team of reporters visited a school in South Tehran to inquire why none of its 2,000 students applied to the contest. The responses of the students were conclusive, as one of them asserted, and I quote, "You know better than us that all of the winning participants in the pageants of your magazine are the ones whose houses are in the flamboyant streets of the city's north. Those who ride bicycles, play tennis, learn foreign languages in London or Paris, and are likely to take ballet lessons." End of quote. Zana Rus aspired to create a sense of national solidarity and local sisterhood while smoothing class, ethnic, regional, and other antagonisms. Yet despite these efforts, contentions that unveiled women are more engaged with their outward appearance than with nurturing their interiority prevailed even among the contestants themselves. It is within these intricacies, with all their complexity, that one finds the possibility and limitations of defining the new womanhood and the modern girl in the 1960s and 1970s Iran. Against this backdrop, I'm both, again, proud and grateful that the book, Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, joins a growing field of studies on women and gender in Iran, as well as the rising subfield of Pahlavi studies of the past few years. And again, thank you for your patience, and I'm looking forward to your question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hendelman-Baavur. That was fascinating. Really appreciate you being with us here today. A reminder to those in the audience, y'all can submit those questions through either the Zoom Q&A session or section, or you can email those questions to media@iran1400.org. While we wait for those questions to come in, I can start with one of my own. Could you tell us more about the readership of these magazines? Were these those reading it off mostly of the same class, or could you compare it to what I grew up with, which is when we're reading these magazines, these are the people who we want to be, or was there a lot of actually upper middle class women reading these magazines?
Okay, so first of all, it's a great question, and I deliberated on it for quite a while. It's interesting because, first of all, the most obvious answer would be it has to be literate women that can afford to buy it. But magazines, contrary, for example, to dailies, have longer shelf lives, and they can be passed on. Whether it's in clinics or in other establishments or between women of the same family. That means that each issue could be read by more than one person that bought or purchased the magazine. This is one thing. And the other thing is that wherever I go and I meet with people who were in Iran in the 1960s or 1970s, I can't find one person who will not say, when I mention Zane Ruz, who would not say my mother read it, or my aunts read it, or my sister read it. They know the magazine. And it was one of the most popular magazines, if not the most popular magazine in Iran from mid-1960s. And not only that, but I've managed to find in the early 1970s a quote from the editor-in-chief of the magazine, Majid Davami, who said that 45% of the magazine's readers are actually men who read it secretly. That means that they were trying to see or read what was of interest to women. And there were also complaints and letters by readers sent to the magazines by men. Some of them were very angry that the magazine is promoting all sorts of new ideas and called them to have quarrels and arguments in their homes because, again, it was new and sometimes very provocative in terms of the topics that were raised. There were also, of course, caricatures and cartoons, and some of them were highly hypersexualized. And we can even say that were many of them were even misogynists. A lot of the staff in the magazines were also men. Men wrote not only articles, but also participated in different sections of the magazines. For example, there were sections of short stories, and many of them were written by men. But again, this is not to say that women did not participate in the formation of the magazine, and they were the main contributors, while they were trying again to enlarge the circulation of the magazine. One of the things that surprised me is that the circulation of magazines in Iran and of newspapers as a whole was relatively low. And if we compare it, for example, to Turkey during the same years, so we can see that the entire production, the journalistic production of Iran matches the circulation of the leading daily newspaper in Turkey at the same time. So I tried to, during the research, I tried to see what was the cause of this low circulation in Iran. And there were all sorts of very interesting traditions that developed. People could rent issues and pay a small sum for them and then return them. So it was very interesting how it was consumed by different classes. And we also have to remember that there were networks between city dwellers and the countryside. From the mid-1950s, there were waves of immigrants, internal immigrants, coming from the rural areas, from the countryside, to the major city centers. And they actually worked with upper classes and with the middle classes, and they were also able to encounter these magazines. So to say that they were completely unable to encounter them would not be correct. Not only that, but there were stories that were brought in the magazines by women from the peripheries, and they were interviewed, and their stories were presented in the magazines. That means that they were able to share their experience, whether directly or through journalists who traveled throughout Iran and try to bring interesting stories. Not only that, but they also had a special telephone line that people who did not wish to write a letter or could not write a letter to the magazines could call the magazine and leave a message about whatever they wanted to share. So it was very interesting as to who were exactly the core readers of the magazines. If I need to say, the core readers would be literate girls from between the ages 15 and 35, like very young mothers. This was the core readership of the magazines.
That is fascinating. Thank you. Our next question is from Dr. Fariba Zarinabov. I remember the year Elahe Azadi won, and we used to fight over the magazine with my siblings at home. Have you read the serials in the magazine and the themes? One I remember very well was called Tell Me What to Do. Beman Begoyid Shekonam.
There are indeed a lot of advice that columns that were published in the magazine, and they were actually instructing, like a bigger sister, instructing, and they were the new, again, purveyors of information, even on topics that maybe young girls or even young mothers were reluctant to discuss it because they were shy or did not feel comfortable to discuss some of these issues with their mothers. So they found the magazines to be the one channel where they can, again, get advices, and if they have questions, even send them and get responses. So what I did in this particular book is to have a very broad look on these magazines and their development and their history and their place within the print industry in the 1960s and 1970s. And inshallah, my next project is to go through very specific and systematically explore specific columns and to show the breadth of information and what exactly, and to analyze it specifically and more thoroughly than this book could offer.
Great. Thank you. Hopefully you can do that in the future. Looking forward to reading that. The next question from Caroline Meyer. Could you clarify what was expected of a woman from a respectable family?
That was interesting because this is also something that I asked. Why do they have to mention a respectable family? I believe that it was an abstract, but the person who read it, or women who read it, or girls who read it, knew what it meant. That means that they are good girls. Now we can try to understand what a good girl is. And I believe that the other criteria, that means to have 10 people to vouch for you or to say that you are a good person. And of course, sending your parents' consent, not doing things behind the backs of your family or your acquaintances was important. That means the social acceptability, that you are not someone who lives on the fringes, but you're a respectable person. And people can say socially that you are a respectable woman or a young woman or a young girl. So I believe that, I hope that it answers more or less the question. But again, this was something that I truly tried to understand again what it meant. And in the book, I actually put it like, I phrased it in a way to show that it can go to several ways. It's not exactly clear what they meant.
Great, thank you. Our next question. Well, first, let me remind the audience, we do have time for a few more questions. Feel free to send those into the Q&A that is on the Zoom. The next question, what were the effects, if any, of censorship in this magazine? Was there any censorship from the state?
Well, it's a great question. It's a great question because it was there all along. And I believe that women's magazines, because of their content, which is less political than perhaps daily magazines or other periodicals that were published in Iran that were regarded to be like more serious and critical, were less censored. Again, because they were perceived as occupying themselves with women's issues, and they are less political. There was a lot of, again, state propaganda that we can sense it in the pages of the magazines, like declarations by the Shah in relation to women and the family, or the participation of Shah Banu and women of the royal court in different congresses and different events that had public effect on society. But I believe that the most honest questions that I received with regard to censorship was when I interviewed journalists, female journalists from the time. And one of them told me that they knew where the red lines were at. They knew not to cross them. And if someone crossed them, then the editor-in-chief would receive a phone call, and then he would let know the person involved not to do it again. I also asked if censored actually went through each and every page, like they read everything. Because, for example, in the late 1960s and early 1970s, each issue of whether it was Etela'at Banovan or Zan al-Ruz was about 100 pages. So it's like going and reading each and every page weekly, and it wasn't the only publication. So they said that they didn't go through they didn't go through that each and every page, but they actually experienced the most effective censorship there is, which is self-censorship. Again, they knew what are the red lines and what not to say or not to write about. This is more or less the answer that I got.
Thank you. That's definitely, it's interesting to think about this in comparison to more political works, but to still be encountering censorship. Fascinating. So
no, there were periodicals. For example, Ketabema by Al-Ahmad. After the first issue was confiscated, and it was the first and the last to be published. Wow. So there were different kinds of censorship, and there are a couple of books that are focusing on censorship. So there was censorship at the time. From the 1966 onward, there was more censorship. But again, not every magazine experienced it the same way. And women's magazines experience it less because of their audiences and because of their topics. They were perceived to be less sensitive to the government.
That makes sense. The next question, when I typically think about this time, especially in terms of Westernization, I think of gharbzadegi, or West toxification, and the backlash against this modernization. Did the magazine encounter that? People who were against what is becoming, people who were trying to become this new modern woman?
They were aware of it. Not only that, but if you read the original text of gharbzadegi, you can see that Al-Ahmad and later on Ali Shariati targeted these magazines specifically and their editors and their proprietors. So they directed their criticism right at them. But it was interesting that, for example, veiled women for many years were excluded from the magazines. They were, again, a symbol of backwardness. And it was only in 1977 that the magazines were trying to show that traditional women are also part or can also be modern under the veil. So it was very interesting that up until 1977, they were reluctant to have any idea or argue with these with arguments or criticisms such as these. But we have to take into consideration a very interesting example of Mutahari. Mutahari in the 1960s, in mid 1960s, in the mid 1960s. Sorry, I'm excited to talk about it. So yeah, it makes me up. In the mid 1960s, there were deliberations about the Family Protection Act in Iran. And there was a public debate on it that was taking place on the pages of the magazines. And Mutahari at the time wrote to the magazine, and he wanted to bring his opinion of how Islam considers women's place in society. And they allowed this confrontation between the judge, who was part of the team that laid the foundation for changes in the law of women's status, and Mutahari. And he wrote for about 6 weeks a column explaining what is the position of women in Islam, and it was later combined, and he published it as a book. But unfortunately, the person who was discussing these issues with him on the pages of Zanaruz died in the middle. He had a heart attack during these deliberations. So Mutahari continued to publish his opinion, and it was published in a magazine. So again, these magazines were not isolated from the discourse that was taking place. But when they did find it necessary, they responded to it. And they had, again, a lot of critics. But the bottom line, they also had to expand their circulation and their advertisers, because otherwise they had to close shop. So they were trying to balance between, again, the criticism and the westernization, and also between commercial femininity and their claim to advance women's position and support women's awakening. So there were a lot of contradictions within their pages.
Certainly, thank you. We are about time to wrap this event up, but I do have one big question that I'd like to end it on. I know that you wrote this book before the Mahsa Amini Woman Life Freedom protests, but when you think about your book, what do you hope that readers take away from it? And how do you see that it could contribute to our understanding of Iranian women's history and women's rights? When we look towards the future of Iran, which is the message behind the Iran 1400 project, what could we use from your book?
I believe, well, it started because from my personal experience, when I was a young girl, one of the things that I learned, again, from the media and from talks in general, was that Iranian women are the most oppressed in the Middle East and maybe even in the world. And coming and witnessing and reading these magazines, and also witnessing what is going on in recent years, not only in the recent months, we can see that Iranian women are a leading force. And even at times when they weren't as literate as they are today, they found the way to express themselves and also to share their grievances and to advance themselves even in the most problematic circumstances. At the same time, I don't think that when we are talking about women in Iran, there is only one voice. So there are many voices. And again, being an Iranian woman can mean different things to different people. So I would say that being liberated and being free to be any kind of a modern woman that you want to be, this is what I would say, I hope for women in Iran and in other places, to have the freedom to be whoever you want to be.
Fantastic. I think that is a great note to end the Q&A session on. Thanks again for coming and talking about your book, and especially right now, this is such an interesting book to look at and see. The scholarship on Iranian women is incredibly important as Iranian women themselves debate or look towards their future. And like I said, the Iran 1400 project hopes to look on the past in order to better form the idea of the future. So thank you so much for this resource. If y'all enjoyed the talk, please do buy Dr. Liora Hendelman-Baavur's book, Creating the Modern Iranian Woman, Popular Culture Between Two Revolutions. It's published with Cambridge University Press. We do have another Spotlighting an Author event on March 10th with Alex Vatanka about his book, The Battle of the Ayatollahs in Iran, the United States Foreign Policy and Political Rivalry since 1979. Keep an eye on your inbox for more details about that Zoom event. If you enjoyed this event, please check us out at Iran1400.org. We have content in English and Farsi in the form of articles, videos, podcasts, and events about ideas and institutions. such as the women's movement, modernity, identity, education, fine arts, and so on. If you scroll to the bottom of our website, you can sign up to receive our newsletter, and we'll keep you up to date with all of our events and our new content. Lastly, you can find us on social media at Iran 1400 Project. If you are specifically looking for events in line with if you're looking for content in line with today's event, we do have an article from Engendering Laws to Its Gender Blindness by Mehrangi's Kar about the women's movement, and Hoda Mahmoudi's Freedom and the Iranian women's movement that are readily available on our websites. And thanks again for joining us, Dr. Hendelman-Baavur. It was fascinating and truly a great contribution to the scholarship. Thanks, y'all.